Good morning. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Corey Merkel. I work upstairs on the second floor. I am the inspection supervisor. There's 4 of us with permits, licensing, and inspection. My primary duties are to supervise and help and guide the operations and code enforcement inspectors that go out and answer the 311 complaints that come into the 311 response line. Anything that is in relation to property maintenance and code violations come directly to my inspectors, and they go out and within 3 to 5 business days answer that complaint and decide if it deserves having a citation issued. So existing property maintenance is what we're here to talk about today, and the International Property Maintenance Code is the primary code book that we use whenever we are going out and answering complaints in residential neighborhoods, as well as any existing commercial building or restaurant business area here in the city of Pittsburgh. Examples of the most common violations that PLI enforces are listed up here on the board, but that is just a very small portion of some of the things that we get complaints on and go out and answer. Obviously, weeds and debris on property, overgrowth of hedges and bushes, abandoned vehicles on private property, sidewalks and tripping hazards. This can also include parking lots, shopping districts, any areas which the public can have a hazard, electrical violations, building violations, occupancy permits, such as parking pads and fences. Occupancy permits are something that have actually been required in the city of Pittsburgh since 1958, but a lot of people never got permits for things such as fences, which almost everybody has fences around your yards. Usually these things do not become an issue. Occasionally then you end up having new neighbors in new neighborhoods and realizing that when people get surveys that certain things are built over property lines or were built incorrectly, and then we may come out to help try to enforce some of those situations. Vacant structures and land, also that one is highly related to the complaints such as overgrowth, weeds, debris, garbage dumped, vehicles, anything along those lines. Mostly what we're primarily interested in is the safety of the residents of the city of Pittsburgh, as well as making sure that property values are maintained by maintaining your own properties and allowing them to remain to be structures that are safe to be occupied. How are complaints originated? There's a lot of different ways that people can submit complaints. The main one is by picking up your cell phone and calling the 311 hotline. Any complaints that are submitted on the 311 hotline, regardless if they're for our department or any other department that the city has, 311 will decide who is the best person to send that complaint to initially. Right now, with technology always advancing, you can actually call, text, tweet, or electronically submit over your phone or over the computer any of your complaints. The City of Pittsburgh website has a link to the 311 website, which you can type in your own complaint and put in as much information as you would like. They also offer the opportunity for you to be able to put in pictures, so that can definitely help if it's areas of a building that our inspectors cannot see. Due to us not being able to trespass on people's properties. If the violation is in the back of the building and the back of the building is landlocked, it's very important that you put your name down if you are a complainant, as well as your phone number, contact information. It is not something that our inspectors are not sharing the information with the house that is being complained upon as to who the complainant is, but obviously in some conditions they know that the only way that we have visualized and watched what the violation is because we had permission to enter on one of the neighboring properties. The city, there's also a app that you can download on your phone that's free. It's called the MyBurg app. I actually have used this myself, where if they don't pick up your trash, you could just go right onto the MyBurg app. It automatically populates to the location that you're at. You can set up a complaint, put in the information of what your concern is. After they send somebody out to address the issue, they will send you back an immediate response letting you know that the issue has been resolved or what the next step will be. 311 also forwards any complaints to police or any other public safety employees if it's a complaint related to those areas. Community groups are somebody that a lot of people in neighborhoods that may not have access to internet or the computers or just not feel like using those avenues. They can contact the community groups in their neighborhood, and they are in direct contact with the council people for the different wards. And then they submit their complaints, usually using the same 311 system and the same avenues that we have to put new complaints in as well. Like I said, requests are anonymous, and each request prompts an inspection. Some complaints, whenever we go out to a particular address, let's say that maybe the address is wrong, and it's actually the property that's next door. At times that may be unfounded whenever we get there because the inspector is looking at that particular property. But then if they notice that they must be talking about the property next door, we do have the ability that we can pick up that property for the complaint, realizing that it was a mistake. There is still a lot of avenues with the 311 and the disbursement of the complaints. So it's really important, if you want to be notified as to what's going on with your complaint that you submitted, that you put your contact information in there, at least your email, so that they can sometimes say, you know, that the complaint was unfounded due to maybe wrong address or something like that. So it's really important to put your information in if you want to be contacted about the particular violation that was submitted. The process, the diagram that I had a handout over on the counter. This is a little bit difficult to read from a distance, but your initial 311 complaints get sent to an inspector's computer, which we use a computer program that schedules and tells us when all of our complaints are due. That inspector has approximately 5 business days to get out to the property and determine if the complaint is a valid complaint. If there's 2 ways that it goes from there. Obviously, if the violations are found, we will send a first notice to the property owner that is basically letting them know that a code violation has been found on their property. It gives them a description of what the violation is. It tells you the location in which the violation is occurring, and it also has a generalized action of correctiveness telling you what you should be doing to abate the violation. Once the first notice is sent, well, let me go back for one moment. If they get to that property and realize that the property has a lot more issues going on than just the one thing that they had talked about, the complaint could get referred over to our demolition inspector if the property looks like it should be condemned. I don't want to get into too much talking about condemned properties because that goes in a completely different way. But whenever the property does get cited, the inspector will be notified within either 15 or 30 days to come back to the property to do another inspection. The reason why it's either 15 or 30 days is that we decided that for certain violations like overgrowth, garbage, debris, abandoned vehicles, open and vacant structures, that they should only have 15 days from the time that they get their first notice to abate the violation. So if those violations are included on the citation, an inspector will be back in 15 days to see if it has been corrected. If not, the next scheduled inspection is another 15 days. Now, up here on the board, it's talking about 15 or 30-day compliance period. We also do enforce some fire code inspection violations and things that are a much higher priority with public safety. So when those violations are issued, they're going to be coming back to check to see if there's any movement towards abating the violation within only 5 days. Things that would take 30 days for a reinspection is your gutter is nuisancely draining water onto a neighboring property, or you have certain areas that are also structural with the building, like loose bricks or a column that may have been hit by a vehicle. After the third inspection is completed and the violation still exists, it gets sent over to the court system to be scheduled at the local magistrate to hold a hearing. At this point in time, the volume of cases that make it through all 3 stages without abating their violations. Some magistrates, it may take an additional 1 month to maybe even 2 months during these heavy summer months to get that case actually shown before the magistrate. The magistrate, he is the one that will either make a determination of either giving the property owner more time to come into compliance, or they can issue a fine, or they can give a continuance on the case as well. Whenever a property has violations such as the overgrowth, garbage, debris, a building that's unsecure and open, at the same time that the document gets sent to the magistrate to set up a hearing, a document also goes to Public Works saying that this property is overgrown, it needs cleaned, it needs secured. Legally, we have to send the 3 notices to the property owners before DPW can come onto the property and do what is called a clean and lien, or to secure the building, which then the legal department will send out a bill and try to recuperate those costs. Same as with the magistrate. Whenever that request gets made for cutting whether it's a vacant lot or a lot that somebody's currently occupying, that also takes time. If you have 5,000 properties across the 32 wards over the case of the summer that have been abandoned for some reason and is not being maintained, it will obviously take a little bit of time for those entities to get out there and clean it up.
Can I add one quick note to that? Corey touched base on the time span with the magistrate to have it make it to the docket. That time could be expanded to years. I just got a response back from district court for a violation that we wrote 6 years ago, because that's how long it took them to track down the defendant and get a response from the defendant. If they don't get a response from the defendant, that won't make it to the docket. So when we write these violations and we do send it to court, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to show up that month or even that year. So that is one aspect. It's kind of anomalous, but it does happen.
Yeah, that is definitely something that hinders our ability to be able to take care of properties. The city of Pittsburgh has acquired, obviously over time, certain lots. And usually that's because liens have been placed in such a great amount on that lot that if it is in an area that the city feels like that they should acquire it, they will. Otherwise, the properties that we are citing for overgrowth, garbage, debris, dumping, the continual people taking off boards that have already put on there by DPW after we've already came and cut and cleaned and secured a property. It doesn't mean that that might stay secure for a week, for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years. So whenever that board gets taken back off, in some cases we can expedite it getting boarded back up. But if the property has not been in court in the recent past, as in say the last 6 months, we need to go through the same process again to make sure that nobody else is now being a responsible party or that that property hasn't changed hands. I'm going to flip to the next one. Does anybody have any questions about the violation process and how we send out our notices and how re-inspections occur?
It's only generated through 311. I mean, you guys don't go out on your own and drive around, and if you see locations that appear to be overgrown or abandoned, then you'll initiate something?
Absolutely, we do. That is what's called a pickup. A calculation that has been made in the recent past is that from August of last year to August of this year, between less than 15 inspectors, we have anywhere between 12 and 15 code and operations inspectors. They have answered over 40,000 complaints, or did, and included in that number is also the times that they go back for re-inspections. So that's approximately somewhere in the range of 33 or 34 400 complaints per inspector per year, working 5 days a week. So if I'm up in Troy Hill, where I used to work in the north side, and I had multiple properties on one street that had violations, and then all of a sudden I noticed that there's a support column that's on the front of a house, and that support column has been hit by a vehicle and the gutter is also damaged. That's obviously a safety issue. Our inspectors are supposed to stop and do what's called a pickup, write up that property and cite it the same way as something that gets sent in to 311 as a complaint. There's also a lot of DPW employees, such as garbage men, mail carriers as well, people that deliver medicine to houses that also put in a lot of these 311 complaints too. Because in some cases you have individuals that live in houses that are never going to reach out for help. But if they get maybe medicines or meals delivered to them, somebody may notice an issue, and then they also call 311, and then those complaints come in. You know, if I'm driving through a neighborhood and I notice that there is a stroller that's on a porch, and that porch is missing guards throughout it, that's something that would set off a red flag. Like, you know that there's children that are there, and now you have a porch that is missing guards, that somebody could definitely get hurt. So to say, do we stop and write things up? Absolutely, we do. Our workload is also full enough that, you know, we could do inspections all day and not stop. But a lot of times during the year, a lot of our inspectors have worked into the winter months, or our months where obviously when the grass stops growing, we're getting a lot less complaints in regards to exterior property conditions, and then we can focus more on the actual properties. So in the winter months is a lot of times where an inspector may take on additional projects, or let's say that councilwomen and men are asking us to maybe take an extra look into certain neighborhoods because of violations. That would be good times for our inspectors to go out and do a little bit more targeted area violations.
So if you have an abandoned house in your neighborhood and it's been abandoned for years and years, what can you assume from that? That nobody's ever complained, or that it's gone through the system and it's just one of those ones that have been, I mean, if you can't ever get in touch with the property owner, what's the next step if the property owner never responds?
One of the things that can happen is if a property becomes tax delinquent, okay? So anytime, anybody can look on the Allegheny County Real Estate webpage and see who the owner of a property is. And they can see the mailing address that that person has set up for an owner address. They can also see a tax address that's set up as well. If taxes are being unpaid, if all of the mail is going to that same property and the property is boarded up, unless they have a proper forwarding address to get a hold of that particular owner, they're never going to be able to track that owner down. Occasionally, the magistrate system can look up and see if that said owner's name has been involved in any other court proceedings, maybe a divorce hearing, maybe something criminal. If the magistrate can find an additional address to prove that that person still exists and they've just walked away with that property and conveniently not changed their addresses around so that it's difficult to find them, they can issue warrants to try to get these individuals to get into court. If they live locally, they can also send out constables to go and try to find these individuals that vacated properties and abandoned them. One of the things that we want to try to do as far as property maintenance goes, though, is to make sure that that property remains secure, so that nobody can get in there and start squatting or any children in the neighborhood get hurt, and that the overgrowth and garbage, if garbage is being dumped or collected at the property, gets maintained. Unfortunately, at this time, there is no reoccurring list that is set up for DPW every year to say that because we cleaned and leaned that property last year, we're going to do it this year. So I recommend that as soon as you see that property get in violation of 10 inches of overgrowth throughout the property, to call into 311, submit your complaint. That way, in 45 days after the legal system does its part again by trying to send notices to the individuals, then that request gets made by DPW. I wish there was a better solution. I know that they're working on getting more crews, because right now, that's one of the things that if we had 100 more crews, I'm not sure we could still take care of all of the vacant properties throughout the city of Pittsburgh.
The neighbors can't do anything. I mean, like, if they would decide, the community group, so we're going to go in there and clean this guy's place up.
After speaking with council members, at times certain community groups will go on to certain parcels and be able to do a cleanup. However, we cannot authorize that ourselves. Any neighbor that calls and says, well, I'm just going to go over and do it myself, we cannot say, well, that sounds like a great idea to protect your own property, but we cannot tell you, yes, 100% that is something that you can go ahead and do. Because legally, we cannot trespass on the properties beyond where the front door is, where the mail carriers go, and where the utility boxes are. So if we can see violations from a higher point that is easy to access, like a road that is, or public right-of-way that is around or upon the rear of a property, that is something we can absolutely do. Can I take a ladder and look over somebody's fence? No, I cannot. That is over and beyond reasonable efforts to look for a violation. And that's where, whenever you're making complaints on properties that are landlocked, you definitely should include your information so that we can reach out to you, and you can specifically tell 311 to put your name, put your number on the complaint so that we can easily find that information and call you.
If the overgrowth is to the point where you can't even walk down the sidewalk, I mean, the city doesn't just say, well, we need to get out there and clean this because it's a hazard to the public.
There are times, again, through DPW and through council, that they can get authorization to go through and use some of their machines to take care of large patches of land of multiple parcels that houses have all been demolished off of 3, 4, 5, 10, 20 years ago.
This is just one house on the street.
Yeah, in one house on the street, as soon as the complaint gets ran through the cycle of 3 letters being mailed out, whether they're being received by anybody or not, that request gets put in for it to be done. I myself have went in front of my neighbors' houses before and used a weed whacker, and if the house is occupied, that is something that's easily done. You knock on the door and you say, may I take care of this for you? And it's a yes. But whenever it's an unoccupied vacant structure, there is no one to ask, there is no one to give you permission. So, it's not to say that you couldn't take care of that little area of the sidewalk if you choose to, but you do not want to be trespassing upon property.
I think I can answer that gentleman's question. My name is Bill Crean. I'm with the Public Works Department. I'm superintendent of streets. And all these clean and liens end up on my desk, and they are dispersed to the different 6 maintenance divisions. The construction division does the board ups for public safety. If this hedge issue is a safety issue, kids walking back and forth to school, bus stop, we'll certainly address that sooner than later if it's known to us. But otherwise, we just go about it systematically. If we have enough crews that day, we'll put out a clean and lean crew. If not, we do have regular maintenance things. We do potholes, litter cans, street sweeping. So clean and leans are just sort of got thrown on our plate in the last couple of years. And I attended this meeting just to get a feel for how the process works, because I was really unclear how it all worked. So that's why I'm here. But if you put a 311 in and just say it's a safety issue, we can address it.
Okay, I've done many 311s.
Have you?
Yes.
And is the property vacant?
I don't know if this property is vacant or not. All I know is that I drive by it frequently, and it's just totally overgrown to the point where it's encroaching on the sidewalks. So theoretically, you guys really don't want to own the property or have the structure taken down. You would prefer to have somebody come in and refurbish it and put it back on the tax. Correct?
Yeah, ideally, when properties become so tax delinquent, or after we have cleaned and leaned and cleaned and leaned and cleaned and leaned a property, every time that happens, the bill can be anywhere between $100, and I've seen them as high as encroaching $2,000 for one property. So that's either maybe an hour or two with 1 or 2 guys, or multiple dump trucks, skid loaders, to remove literally forests that have grown upon properties, which now that one property might take 5, 6 guys in 5 days for them to properly get all that debris off. The debris needs to be taken somewhere and dumped as well. So that holds everything back. But once those liens become so great on a property, that property could be put up for a tax sale, okay? Now, from what I understand, somebody has to initiate that process. Somebody needs to contact the tax department for the city of Pittsburgh and say, hey, if this one's not already on your radar, this house seems to be viable, this should be something put up for a sheriff's sale. Then hopefully once it's listed, one of the community groups, they're remodeling 4 houses up on Bonneview Street with the North Side community group up there. The community groups right now are more interested in ever in being able to purchase those properties and hopefully get them at a good deal so that they can put lots of money into it and then sell it to somebody who's going to be an owner-occupied individual, okay? So the deals are better when the community groups get involved, because once they do the remodel and put all this money into the property, that property is not allowed to be sold to somebody that's going to rent it. They want to make sure whoever is buying it is going to be somebody that's going to be a resident and is going to take more stake and care more about their property because they own it, they're not renting it.
Does that happen when the lien money exceeds the value of the property? Who determines that?
I know, it's funny. It's basically all determined through the tax department. I believe there is a magic dollar amount that once the liens get so high that it is now eligible. I believe there's also a time frame issue. So even though when you're looking at the Allegheny County website and you can see the last 4 years haven't been paid tax-wise, I don't know if only 4 years before, does it take longer than 4 years?
It's 2.
Okay.
At that point, the city will only...
Did you want to introduce
Oh,
yourself?
sorry, yeah. Hi, my name's Molly Onifer, and I'm from the Office of Community Affairs for the Mayor and City of Pittsburgh. So it is 2 years tax delinquent, and the Treasurer and Tax Finance Department will pursue a treasurer's sale at that point only if there is an interested party on that property.
So when I was saying that somebody has to start the process, if nobody ever says this house is tax delinquent and I want to buy it, and whenever I was out in the field, there was a property up near the Fine View Overlook. Fine View Overlook, if anybody's ever been up there, is beautiful, okay?
So its name, honestly.
Yeah, so we're talking about 50 yards around the corner from the Fine View Overlook. There's this house that seems like somebody had ran out of money at one point and was trying to renovate and such and walked away from the project. I mean, literally there was cases of Powerade, like still sitting in there like for the workers to be drinking when they were working. The house went up for sheriff's sale twice. And I wanted to try to go up to the county myself to witness how those particular sales go on. But the ownership has still not changed on this property. And it's one of those properties you would think would be something that somebody out there is going to pay, even if it's a $50,000 lien, because of the view, the value that could potentially be in the future. So it needs to be something that somebody has an interest or a stake in wanting to purchase. One of the areas that you've definitely seen a lot of houses start to get refurbished is there's a group over on East and West Burgess Street that slowly has been cleaning up properties that whenever I saw them the first couple months that I worked a few years ago over in the North Side, I never thought that somebody would come and buy these properties and bring them back up to code. And they're doing that. So slowly but surely, it is a process that does take some time, 2 years of being tax delinquent and over a certain amount of money, and somebody making a phone call to say, I am interested in this property.
So that's the key. Somebody has to say, hey, I want to buy this. So if the neighborhood, if everybody complains about the old abandoned house that's been abandoned for 5 years or 8 years or whatever, the city's not just going to come in there one day and tear it down because it's never had taxes paid on it. It's been abandoned, and who knows what.
I'll let Mark touch on that because he's assistant director and he deals with the properties that are condemned and how long it takes to get them to actually be demolished. And if they are structurally standing and not endangering another structure or a public right of way, as soon as they become to a point where either like a property can be condemned for a lot of reasons, not just for structural issues on the outside, but obviously you see stories in the news about hoarding. And just in the last few days, there was one of those cases that came up. Even though that property and the neighbors said, oh, it was a real nice guy, you know, the inside of that property and the conditions got it put on the condemned list. Now that doesn't mean that it's going to get torn down this week, next week, in a year, or in 2 years. But that might be one that if somebody can acquire, you know, over the next 2 years, it might be something that can be back to a vital property in a neighborhood.
So to touch briefly on condemnation, the condemnation status can indicate a lot of things. It could be a $10 million home. If the water service has been shut off, it's going to be condemned because it's unfit for human occupancy. So being condemned does not necessarily mean it's going to be raised. The instance we were just talking about, I don't know if you saw this on the news, the individual passed away in a home out in Stanton Heights, and it was a hoarding situation. The house is functional and structurally sound, but it's unfit for human occupancy, and that's why it was condemned. It still has water service and utilities, but you can't live in it in its current condition. Now, they can go in, abate that condition, clean out all the garbage, paint it, put new carpets in, and it'll be taken off the condemnation list. So condemnation does not necessarily mean that that structure is going to be raised. We have structures on the condemnation list right now that go back 25 years.
Any other questions?
Just,
If you don't mind, I'll get it so that everyone else can tell.
I know we've become involved with some properties, and there's differences between sheriff's sale and treasurer's sale. So I think that, and that's probably not for this session, but the city, with the little knowledge I have, the city is involved in treasurer sales, and then the sheriff's sale is the county. And I believe that the treasurer sale, the council person from the district can have a say in who purchases that property, whereas I believe the sheriff's sale, it goes to the highest bidder. Yeah. So I think that, you know, as we looked at some properties on South Side, the question was brought to the residents, do you want it to go to treasurer's sale, which may take a little bit longer, or sheriff's sale, which would be quicker, and the residents moved to the treasurer's sale because they would have, they, along with the council person, would have some influence in who would purchase it.
So yeah, I mean, when it comes to, you know, somebody legally owns that property. So that's why there's all those different processes and different methods on how they can be put back out for somebody to purchase it and bring it back up to code. So there's many different avenues that can take, and just like you were explaining with 2 different types of tax sales alone. There's also people that we've sent citations to for 5 years that you never get a resolution from, and then somebody sends them a letter direct to the same addresses that we've been sending mail to, and they respond back and to us finally and say, hey, I just sold the property for $20,000 because somebody finally offered them cash to buy the property. So unfortunately, the way that the magistrate system is set up is that it's very difficult. They can't send a constable even if they know there's an address in Maryland. And you know, there's no way of us knowing if that person is still alive in Maryland if all the mail is coming back. But that is also one small way that I have seen happen on 2 or 3 occasions where we're citing the property, but then somebody reaches out and sends a letter to somebody telling them I would like to purchase this property, and all of a sudden they amazingly respond.
I don't want to get off the subject here, but I've been contacted. I have a house that was my mother's, and I'm renting it to my son. But I've been getting these letters now in the mail where they're saying, no, we want to buy your property. And I'm just curious as to how these people are, I mean, why are they sending these things to me? Because they're just going on the books and saying, oh, it's a rental, it's a rental. I'm going to send out 50 letters to everybody that I see that's renting property. I mean, what, do you have any
With the
insight?
growth in the city of Pittsburgh right now, and let's face it, we have lots of neighborhoods, lots of different diverse groups of people that have grown up in the city of Pittsburgh. Some of these neighborhoods, people really want to revitalize, but they want to do it in the least expensive way they can possibly acquire property. And the easiest way that they can do it, that if you're a real estate agent, and let's say that you're just starting out your career and you don't have a lot of contacts, clients, one way that you can definitely try to get people to get properties that you know you have other buyers for is by reaching out to those constituents and making offers like that. Another thing that sometimes happens is that we'll get complaints on literally an entire block, and it's all the same complaint stating the same types of issues, but these houses are occupied. Residents still live in them. We will cite them for violations that are dangerous and hazardous and going to create damage to their properties soon, because they are issues like drainage and foundations and things like that. We kind of know sometimes that may be someone that's involved in real estate that's trying to get us to put complaints on an entire block or an entire group of individuals. That is not what this department is for. So we will go out and again address the immediate safety concerns that are on those buildings and ask those residents to bring up their properties into code. Does anybody else have any other questions or?
Is that website viewable by anyone?
Anyone.
Okay.
Anyone, as well as the Allegheny County Real Estate Portal.
Right.
That's where you can go on and you can find the addresses of where the owner address is, and then also look at the tax address, because it may be a separate address. They may be different. All right. I would like to thank you all for coming today, and hopefully you'll attend some additional forums in the future.